What kind of mother should never get custody? I pulled into the police station when I saw my ex-wife Rebecca waiting with our kids. Logan, our 7-year-old, immediately went rigid when he saw us together. Maya, 9, whispered, "Please don't leave us with her." So quietly, only I heard. Rebecca handed them over with her therapist-approved smile. "Tell Daddy how wonderful our week was." Logan stared at his shoes, completely silent. Rebecca pulled me aside while the kids sat in my car. She showed me her phone, screenshots of fabricated texts where I supposedly threatened her. "I'll delete these if you tell the judge I deserve full custody next week. Otherwise, I'm filing a restraining order." Logan was watching us through the car window, hands shaking. "Just say the kids are better off with me. That's all." A week later in family court, Rebecca's lawyer painted her as a recovering victim, showing therapy attendance I knew she'd faked. Rebecca texted me during proceedings. "Remember the screenshots." Logan sat in the children's area, clutching a new Nintendo Switch. Maya told the advocate she was scared but wouldn't explain. When the judge asked about Rebecca's stability, she mouthed, "Choose wisely," from across the room. I started testifying about her progress, keeping it vague. Then Maya ran into the courtroom sobbing. "Don't make us live with Mom, please." The judge called a recess. Rebecca cornered me. "Control her or I'll make sure you never see them again." When court resumed, Maya was too distraught to continue. The judge ordered psychological evaluations. 4 weeks later, we returned. Rebecca showed me new evidence, photos she'd doctored to show bruises, ready to claim I'd hurt her. The judge called me to testify. "Has Ms. Coleman maintained her mental health treatment?" I looked at Logan, who was completely catatonic with fear. "No, she's been having episodes around the children." I pulled out my phone. "And she's been threatening me with falsified evidence if I don't lie to you." Rebecca exploded. "He's gaslighting everyone. He's the abuser." The judge ordered immediate evaluations. Rebecca's lawyer argued desperately. Maya told the judge about Mommy's special medicine that made her act scary. But Logan remained absolutely silent. The case was collapsing. The judge mentioned joint custody. That's when Logan stood up. He walked in carrying his Switch, set it on the judge's bench. "One game for every day I stayed quiet." His voice was barely audible. "Mommy said if I told, Daddy would go to jail forever." "Tell what, Logan?" "The lady in the basement, Tuesday night." The courtroom went silent. Mommy's friend from therapy group. She came for dinner. They fought about money. Mommy pushed her down the stairs. Logan was shaking violently. She stopped moving. Mommy and her boyfriend wrapped her in plastic, put her in the freezer in our basement. Rebecca lunged at him. "You lying brat! I'll fucking kill you!" The bailiffs restrained her as she screamed. "Check his medical records! He's delusional! He sees things!" Police units were already heading to Rebecca's house. My phone rang immediately. The detective's voice was grim. "We need Logan at the station. We found something in the basement. And it's not the first body." I grabbed both kids and pulled them against me while the bailiffs wrestled Rebecca to the floor. She kept screaming threats at Logan, calling him a liar and worse things I tried to block from his ears. A tall detective in a gray suit was already on his phone near the back of the courtroom, talking fast and pointing at other officers. Judge Perkins was standing now, banging his gavel and ordering everyone except essential personnel to clear out. Logan shook so hard against my chest that I could feel each tremor through my ribs. Maya wrapped her arms around both of us and buried her face in my shoulder. The bailiffs hauled Rebecca toward a side door while she twisted around to stare at Logan with pure hatred in her eyes. 2 court officers appeared next to us and gestured toward a private door behind the judge's bench. We moved as a unit with me, keeping both kids pressed close, their small bodies feeling impossibly fragile. The screaming faded as we entered a small conference room with beige walls and a table surrounded by chairs. Logan's fingers dug into my shirt so tight, I knew there would be marks later. The detective from the courtroom came through the door less than 5 minutes later and dropped to one knee in front of Logan. He had kind eyes and spoke in a voice that stayed calm and steady. He told Logan he was incredibly brave for telling the truth and that right now officers were going to Rebecca's house to check the basement. He explained that Rebecca couldn't get anywhere near Logan anymore, that she was locked up where she couldn't hurt anyone. I kept my arms around Logan while the detective asked if he felt okay answering a few questions. Logan managed a tiny nod, but his grip on my shirt never loosened. A woman in a blue blazer slipped into the room and introduced herself as a victim services coordinator. She sat down at the table and pulled out a notebook, while the detective stayed kneeling at Logan's level. Logan started talking in a voice so quiet we all had to lean in to hear him. He said the lady came for dinner on Tuesday, and they argued about money his mom owed her. He watched from the top of the basement stairs when his mom got really mad and shoved the lady hard. The lady fell down all the stairs and landed at the bottom and didn't move anymore. Logan's voice cracked when he described how his mom's boyfriend Hassan showed up later and they got plastic sheeting from the garage. They wrapped the lady up and carried her to the big freezer in the basement. The detective recorded everything on his phone while asking gentle questions about what time things happened and what Hassan looked like. I felt sick listening to my 7-year-old describe witnessing a murder and body disposal while I was sleeping in my apartment completely unaware. The victim services coordinator kept her face neutral, but I saw her hand shake slightly as she took notes. My phone started buzzing in my pocket over and over. I pulled it out and saw calls from my lawyer, from Rebecca's lawyer, from numbers I didn't recognize. I silenced it and shoved it back in my pocket. Maya looked up at me with huge, scared eyes and asked if they had to go back to Mommy's house ever again. I promised her absolutely not, that they were staying with me from now on and nothing would change that. Detective Lockhart confirmed that emergency protective custody was already in effect right this second. Judge Perkins would make it official as soon as he dealt with the immediate crisis in the courtroom. Maya let out a shaky breath and pressed closer against my side. Logan stayed silent now that he'd finished his account, just staring at the table and breathing too fast. An hour passed with us sitting in that small room while the detective stepped out twice to take calls. The second time he came back, his expression had gone grim and heavy. He sat down across from us and told me they found a body in the basement freezer exactly where Logan described. The forensic team was expanding their search because they discovered signs of more remains in the same freezer. My vision went blurry at the edges as I processed that Logan had been living in that house for a week, sleeping upstairs while dead bodies sat in the basement, keeping this horrible secret because Rebecca threatened him. She bought him video games to stay quiet about murder. The room felt too hot and too small. I pulled both kids tighter against me and focused on their breathing to keep myself from losing it completely. A woman with curly red hair and a warm smile came through the door, carrying a soft bag decorated with cartoon characters. She introduced herself as Scarlett Boone and explained she was a child psychologist who worked with kids in crisis situations. She knelt down like Detective Lockhart had and spoke directly to Logan, telling him he did something incredibly hard and brave today. She said she was here to make sure he felt safe and to help him with the scary feelings he might be having. Logan looked at her for the first time since we entered the room. Scarlett pulled a stuffed dog from her bag and asked if Logan wanted to hold it while they talked. He took the dog and clutched it against his chest. Maya stayed pressed against my other side, watching everything Scarlett did with careful attention. Scarlett spent 20 minutes just talking with both kids about how they felt and what they needed right now. She never pushed them to say more than they wanted to. When she finished, she told me both kids were holding up remarkably well given the circumstances, but Logan especially would need serious help processing what he experienced and witnessed. Detective Lockhart came back and explained that Logan would need to give a formal video-recorded interview at the police station's Child Advocacy Center. He said the center was designed specifically for child witnesses, with comfortable rooms and specially trained interviewers. I could be present for the whole thing, and Scarlett would be there to support Logan through the process. We scheduled it for tomorrow morning to give Logan time to rest tonight, though I seriously doubted any of us would sleep. Scarlett agreed that was the right timeline and promised to meet us at the advocacy center. She gave me her card and told me to call if either kid needed anything before tomorrow. Logan still held the stuffed dog she'd given him. Judge Perkins called us back into the courtroom after most people had cleared out. Only the lawyers, court staff, and a few officers remained. The judge sat behind his bench looking tired and angry. He issued emergency orders granting me full temporary custody, effective immediately, and prohibiting Rebecca from any contact with the children, even supervised visits. Rebecca's lawyer stood up and argued weakly that Logan's testimony needed verification before such drastic measures. Judge Perkins cut him off mid-sentence and said the police investigation would provide all the verification needed. He added that protecting the children came first regardless. Rebecca was transferred from court holding to county jail on a no-bail hold pending formal charges. The judge looked at Logan and Maya and told them they were very brave and they would be safe now. We left through a side entrance to avoid any reporters who might be gathering outside. I drove Logan and Maya to my apartment in complete silence, except for Maya asking twice if we were really not going back to Mommy's house. The apartment suddenly felt way too small for everything we were dealing with, but at least it was safe and familiar to them. Logan held my hand from the moment we got out of the car and wouldn't let go even when we got inside. Maya followed us like a shadow, asking questions about what happens next that I couldn't answer. I ordered pizza from their favorite place even though none of us felt hungry. Creating some sense of normal routine seemed important when everything else had exploded into chaos. The pizza arrived and we sat at my small kitchen table pushing food around our plates. Logan ate 3 bites. Maya managed half a slice. I gave up pretending and cleared the table. That night, I set up both kids in my bedroom with extra blankets and pillows. Logan refused to sleep alone, and Maya wouldn't leave his side no matter what I suggested. I took the couch and left both bedroom doors open so they could see me if they woke up. I lay there in the dark, listening to them breathe and occasionally whimper in their sleep. Every sound made me want to drive to the county jail and do things to Rebecca that would land me in a cell next to hers. My phone lit up over and over on the coffee table. 17 missed calls, dozens of texts from lawyers and family members and reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. I couldn't deal with any of it until I knew my kids were as okay as they could possibly be right now. The apartment stayed quiet, except for the sound of two traumatized children trying to sleep and one father trying not to fall apart. The morning came too early. I woke up on the couch feeling like I hadn't slept at all, which was basically true since I'd been checking on the kids every hour. Logan and Maya were still curled up together in my bed when I peeked in, both finally sleeping without the whimpering that had broken my heart all night. I made coffee and tried to figure out how to get through this day. My phone showed 32 new messages I still couldn't deal with. Someone knocked on the door at 8 o'clock exactly, and I looked through the peephole to see Scarlett standing there with a big soft bag over her shoulder. I opened the door and she smiled warmly, keeping her voice low since the kids were still sleeping. She explained she wanted to come early to help prepare Logan before we went to the advocacy center, using some gentle techniques that would make him feel safer about talking. I led her into the living room and she set her bag down carefully. That's when I heard a soft whine from inside the bag and saw a golden retriever's face peek out. Scarlett laughed quietly and said this was Biscuit, her therapy dog who helped kids feel calm when they were scared. Logan appeared in the doorway right then, rubbing his eyes and looking confused. Scarlett knelt down and asked if he wanted to meet Biscuit, and the dog walked over to Logan with its tail wagging slowly. Logan reached out and touched the dog's head, then sat down on the floor and wrapped his arms around Biscuit's neck. The dog just stood there patiently while Logan buried his face in the soft fur. For the first time since the courtroom, I saw something almost like a smile cross my son's face. Maya came out next and watched everything from beside me, her eyes tracking every move Scarlett made. Scarlett noticed and invited Maya to come pet Biscuit too, explaining that the dog was trained to help kids who were dealing with scary things. Maya sat down next to Logan, and the dog moved between them, letting both kids hold on to her. Scarlett spent the next 20 minutes just talking with them about how Biscuit made people feel safe and how it was okay to feel scared or sad or angry about things that happened. She never pushed them to talk about Tuesday night or the courtroom or their mom. She just created this bubble where they could be kids petting a dog and feeling a little bit normal. Logan started talking first, asking quiet questions about what Biscuit liked to eat and where she slept. Maya asked if Biscuit ever got scared of things too. Scarlett answered everything patiently, weaving in gentle ideas about how everyone feels afraid sometimes and how talking about scary things makes them less powerful. After a while, she turned to Maya and asked how she was feeling about everything that happened yesterday. Maya's face got serious, and she said she was worried about Logan having to talk to more people today. Scarlett nodded and explained that the people Logan would talk to were specially trained to be gentle and kind, and that I would be there the whole time, and that Logan could take breaks whenever he needed. She looked at Logan and asked if he had any questions about today. Logan shook his head but kept petting Biscuit. Scarlett pulled some papers from her bag and showed me referral information for trauma therapists who worked with kids, explaining we'd need to start regular therapy sessions soon. She said Logan was showing clear signs of severe stress from what he witnessed and from being threatened into silence, and Maya was dealing with her own trauma from trying to protect her brother while feeling helpless. I took the papers and promised to call them today. Scarlett stayed for another half hour, just being present while the kids played with Biscuit and slowly relaxed a little. When it was time to go to the advocacy center, Logan asked if Biscuit could come with us. Scarlett said absolutely. That was exactly why she brought the dog. We loaded into my car with Biscuit sitting between the kids in the back seat, and I followed Scarlett's directions across town to a building that looked more like a house than an office. The Child Advocacy Center had a regular front door with a welcome mat, and inside it looked like someone's comfortable living room instead of an official building. Soft couches and chairs filled the space, with toys and books scattered around and artwork on the walls. A woman met us at the door and introduced herself as the forensic interviewer who would be talking with Logan. She had a calm, friendly voice, and she knelt down to Logan's level just like Detective Lockhart had done. She explained that they had a special room where Logan could tell his story in his own words, and that everything would be recorded on video so he'd only have to tell it once. Logan gripped my hand tighter. The interviewer said I could sit right next to him the whole time, and Biscuit could be there too if that helped. We walked down a short hallway to a room that looked like a cozy den, with a big soft couch and gentle lighting. A camera was mounted discreetly in one corner, and I could see a window that I realized was probably one-way glass for observers. Logan, Biscuit, and I sat together on the couch, while the interviewer settled into a chair across from us. She started by asking Logan easy questions about school and his favorite games, just getting him comfortable talking. Then she gently shifted to asking if he could tell her about Tuesday night in his own words, taking as much time as he needed. Logan's voice came out barely above a whisper. He described how the lady came to their house for dinner, how she and his mom started arguing in the kitchen about money his mom owed her. He said the lady's voice got really loud, and his mom's face looked scary angry, the kind of angry that made him hide. They moved toward the basement door, and he followed them quietly because he was worried about what his mom might do. He watched from the top of the stairs as they argued more, and then his mom put both hands on the lady's shoulders and pushed hard. The lady fell backward down all the stairs, tumbling and hitting the concrete floor at the bottom. She didn't move after that. Logan said he wanted to run down and help, but he was too scared, and then his mom looked up and saw him watching. She told him to go to his room right now and not come out no matter what he heard. He went to his room but left the door cracked open, and later he heard Hassan arrive and heard them talking in low voices in the basement. He snuck to the top of the stairs again and saw them wrapping the lady in plastic sheeting from the garage. His mom and Hassan carried the wrapped body to the big freezer in the corner of the basement. Logan's voice broke as he described how his mom came upstairs after and found him in the hallway, and how she grabbed his shoulders really tight and told him if he ever told anyone what he saw, Daddy would go to jail forever, and he'd never see me again. She said the police would believe her over a little kid, and I'd be locked up and he'd be all alone. The interviewer stayed perfectly calm and gentle, never interrupting, just letting Logan share at his own pace. She asked a few clarifying questions about timing and what exactly he saw, but mostly she just listened. Logan explained that the next day his mom took him to the store and bought him a brand new Nintendo Switch game, the one he'd been wanting for months. She showed him a whole stack of games she'd already bought and said he could have one for every day he stayed quiet about what happened. She said it was their special secret, and if he was a good boy and kept the secret, he'd get all the games. If he told anyone, Daddy would go away forever. Logan said he knew it was wrong to stay quiet, but he was so scared of losing me that he couldn't make himself tell. Even when we came to court and he saw how upset Maya was, he couldn't say anything because the threat felt so real. The interviewer told him he was incredibly brave for telling the truth now and that he did exactly the right thing. She asked if his mom ever said anything else about what happened to the lady. Logan nodded and said the night after it happened, he heard his mom on the phone with Hassan talking about the others in the freezer, saying they couldn't let anyone find them. He didn't understand what that meant at the time, but after a few days he started having nightmares about more people down there in the dark. The interview went on for almost 2 hours with several breaks where Logan could just pet Biscuit and calm down. By the end, he'd provided details about what the victim was wearing, what time Hassan arrived, specific things his mom said, and the exact location of the freezer in the basement. The interviewer thanked him again for his courage and turned off the camera. Detective Lockhart came into the room looking serious, but trying to smile for Logan's benefit. He told Logan he'd done an amazing job, and the information he provided was going to help a lot of people. Then he asked if I could step into the hallway for a minute. We left Logan with Scarlett and Biscuit, and Detective Lockhart led me a few doors down to a small office. He closed the door, and his expression went grim. The forensic teams had finished their initial examination of Rebecca's basement, and they'd now identified 3 separate victims in the freezer. The woman Logan witnessed was the most recent, but 2 others had been there much longer, possibly several years based on the state of the remains. I felt the room tilt and had to sit down. My kids had been sleeping in that house, playing in the yard above that basement, living their normal lives while their mother kept dead bodies stored below them. Detective Lockhart said the other 2 victims hadn't been identified yet, but they were working on it through missing persons databases. He explained that Logan's testimony was remarkably consistent and detailed, which would be critical for prosecution, and that having Hassan's cooperation would mean Logan definitely wouldn't need to testify at trial. That was the only piece of good news in this nightmare. I asked what happened next, and he said they'd continue processing the scene and building their case against Rebecca. He also mentioned they'd arrested Hassan at his workplace this morning, and Hassan was already starting to talk in exchange for a plea deal. I went back to the room where Logan sat curled against Scarlett with Biscuit's head in his lap. Scarlett caught my eye and gestured for me to sit down. She explained that both kids needed to start trauma therapy immediately, and she'd already made some calls to specialists who had openings next week. She handed me a list of names and numbers, therapists who specifically worked with children who'd witnessed violence. She said Logan was showing severe signs of traumatic stress and would need intensive help processing what he experienced and what his mother did to him. Maya needed help too, dealing with her own trauma from trying to protect Logan while feeling powerless to help him. I promised to call every single number on that list today and get appointments scheduled. Scarlett said she'd stay in touch and check on both kids regularly, and that having Biscuit visit sometimes might help them feel safer as they worked through everything. We left the advocacy center, and I drove straight to the police station where Detective Lockhart had asked me to give my own formal statement. My parents came to get Logan and Maya, taking them back to my apartment with strict instructions not to answer the door for anyone. At the station, I sat in an interview room and told Detective Lockhart everything about Rebecca's threats over the past months, showing him the screenshots of her blackmail texts where she threatened to file false reports if I didn't support her custody case. I described how she'd shown me fabricated evidence and told me exactly what to say to the judge. I explained her pattern of manipulation and how she'd isolated the kids and threatened them. Detective Lockhart recorded everything and said this established her clear pattern of using threats and manipulation to control people, which supported Logan's account of being threatened into silence. He told me Hassan was cooperating fully now, confirming he'd helped Rebecca dispose of the first victim's body and that he'd known about the other two bodies already in the freezer. Hassan claimed Rebecca had told him the other victims were people who'd crossed her or knew too much about her lies and that he'd been too terrified of her to go to the police because she'd threatened to frame him for everything. The detective said Hassan would likely get a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, which meant the case against Rebecca was rock solid. I met with my lawyer that afternoon at her office downtown. She'd already heard about the arrests through the legal community and wanted to discuss how this affected our custody case. She assured me there was absolutely no chance Rebecca would ever get custody or even visitation rights now, and we'd pursue permanent sole custody with a restraining order that would last until the kids were adults. The family court would wait for the criminal case to progress before finalizing everything, but Judge Perkins had already issued emergency orders that gave me full custody, effective immediately. My lawyer said the criminal charges would take months to work through the system, but the custody matter was essentially resolved the moment Logan spoke up in court. By the time I got back to my apartment that evening, my phone had exploded with messages and missed calls. News of Rebecca's arrest had spread through our neighborhood and community, and reporters were trying to contact me for comments. Neighbors I barely knew were texting asking if the rumors were true. My lawyer had already issued a statement on my behalf requesting privacy for the children's sake, but that didn't stop people from trying. I turned off my phone and focused on making dinner for Logan and Maya, who were playing quietly with the toys my parents had brought over. The last thing my kids needed was to see their mother's face all over the news or hear people talking about what happened. I'd protect them from that circus however I could, even if it meant cutting off contact with half the people we knew. 3 days passed in a blur of police updates and therapy appointments. Fiona Staley, the prosecutor assigned to Rebecca's case, called me on Thursday morning while I was making breakfast for the kids. She explained that Rebecca was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit murder, threatening a witness, and child endangerment. Each charge carried serious prison time, and combined they meant Rebecca would never see freedom again, even if she somehow avoided the death penalty. Fiona's voice was calm and professional as she walked me through what would happen next. The grand jury had already indicted Rebecca based on the physical evidence and Hassan's initial statements. Fiona assured me that Hassan's cooperation agreement was solid, and he would testify against Rebecca in exchange for reduced charges. That meant Logan wouldn't have to testify at trial, though they'd prepare him just in case Hassan backed out or the defense challenged his credibility. I felt relief wash over me knowing my son wouldn't have to face his mother in court and relive that night in front of strangers. Fiona explained the trial timeline, the discovery process, and what to expect over the coming months. She promised to keep me informed of every development and said I could call her anytime with questions. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring at the pancakes burning on the stove, trying to process that Rebecca would spend the rest of her life in prison. Logan's first therapy session happened that same afternoon in a small office decorated with calming colors and soft furniture. His therapist was a woman in her 50s who specialized in childhood trauma, and she greeted Logan with a gentle smile that didn't demand anything from him. I sat in the waiting room while they worked together, watching the clock and wondering if Logan would talk or shut down completely. When the session ended 50 minutes later, Logan walked out holding a stack of drawings he'd made instead of talking. I glanced at them while the therapist spoke quietly with me in the hallway. The pictures showed dark stairs leading down into blackness, a large rectangular shape that I recognized as a freezer and stick figures wrapped in what looked like heavy black lines. Logan had used almost exclusively dark colors, pressing so hard with the crayons that some had broken. The therapist explained that drawing was often easier than words for traumatized children, and that Logan was expressing what he couldn't yet say out loud. She said we'd made good progress today, just by him being willing to show what was in his head. We scheduled twice-weekly sessions, and she gave me homework about creating safe spaces at home where Logan could draw or play without pressure to talk. Maya had her own appointment right after with a different therapist in the same building. Her session involved more talking than Logan's had, though I only heard about it secondhand. Maya's therapist worked with her on identifying and expressing her own feelings instead of just worrying about Logan all the time. Maya came out looking tired, but slightly less tense than when she went in. Both therapists emphasized that healing would take time and there would be setbacks along with progress. That evening after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in my apartment and realized I needed help too. The rage I felt toward Rebecca was eating me alive, making it hard to sleep or focus on anything else. I kept imagining what I'd do to her if I could get 5 minutes alone with her, thoughts that scared me because they were so violent. I needed to process these feelings somewhere other than in front of my kids, who needed me to be stable and calm. I started searching online for therapists who specialized in parents of traumatized children. I found a counselor named Dr. Brown, whose profile mentioned working with families affected by violent crime. I called her office the next morning and got an appointment for the following week. My first session with Dr. Brown was harder than I expected because I had to admit how much rage and guilt I was carrying. She listened without judgment as I described wanting to hurt Rebecca, feeling like I should have protected my kids better, and struggling to be present for them when my own emotions were so overwhelming. Dr. Brown explained that my anger was completely normal given what Rebecca had done to our children. She said the key was learning to process it in healthy ways so it didn't leak out around Logan and Maya. We worked on breathing techniques and ways to recognize when I was getting overwhelmed. She helped me understand that taking care of my own mental health wasn't selfish. It was necessary for being the parent my kids needed. The work was exhausting and brought up feelings I'd been pushing down for months, but I knew it was important. Detective Lockhart called me the following Tuesday with an update on the forensic analysis. The 3 victims had all been identified through dental records and DNA testing. The first victim, the woman Logan witnessed being killed, was named Jennifer Gomez. She'd been part of the same therapy group Rebecca attended, though Rebecca had only gone to 3 sessions before the group leader asked her to leave for disruptive behavior. Jennifer had apparently loaned Rebecca money that Rebecca never paid back, and when Jennifer confronted her about it, Rebecca killed her. The second victim was Amanda Brown, a former co-worker from a job Rebecca held 5 years ago. Amanda had discovered Rebecca was stealing from the company and threatened to report her. Rebecca killed Amanda before she could go to management. The third victim was Teresa Williams, a neighbor from Rebecca's previous apartment complex. Teresa had witnessed Rebecca abusing Logan when he was just a toddler and called Child Protective Services. Rebecca killed her shortly after the CPS investigation closed without finding enough evidence to remove the children. All 3 women had confronted Rebecca about her lies or tried to hold her accountable for her actions. All 3 had died for it. Detective Lockhart's voice was grim as he explained that Rebecca had a clear pattern of eliminating anyone who threatened to expose her or challenged her false narratives. I felt sick knowing these women had died simply for trying to do the right thing. Hassan's detailed testimony came through over the next several days as prosecutors prepared their case. He described how Rebecca had killed Amanda and Teresa over a 3-year period, always making it look like the women had simply disappeared or moved away. Hassan claimed he'd helped dispose of Amanda's body because Rebecca threatened to frame him for the murder if he didn't cooperate. After that, she had leverage over him and he felt trapped. He described Rebecca becoming increasingly paranoid and violent, especially when people questioned her stories or caught her in lies. She'd fly into rages over small things and talk constantly about people who'd wronged her and deserved to be punished. Hassan said he'd been terrified of her, but also strangely drawn to her intensity and willingness to do whatever it took to get what she wanted. His testimony painted a picture of Rebecca as a calculated killer who murdered anyone who got in her way. The prosecutor told me Hassan's cooperation meant Logan definitely wouldn't need to testify, which lifted a weight off my chest I'd been carrying since the courtroom revelation. My son had been through enough without having to face his mother in court and be cross-examined by defense lawyers trying to discredit him. 2 weeks after Logan's revelation in court, Judge Perkins called a brief hearing to formally resolve the custody case. I brought both kids with me because the judge wanted to speak directly to them. We sat in the same courtroom where everything had exploded, but this time Rebecca wasn't there, and the atmosphere felt completely different. Judge Perkins smiled warmly at Logan and Maya as they approached the bench with me. The judge explained that based on everything that had happened, I was granted sole legal and physical custody of both children with a permanent restraining order against their mother. Rebecca would have no custody rights, no visitation rights, and no ability to contact them in any way. The judge told Logan he'd been incredibly brave to tell the truth, even though he was scared, and that his honesty had protected other people from getting hurt. Logan nodded but didn't say anything. Maya raised her hand like she was in the school and asked if Mommy would be in jail forever. Judge Perkins leaned forward and spoke gently, explaining that the criminal trial would decide how long Rebecca stayed in prison, but it would likely be for the rest of her life. Maya seemed satisfied with that answer. The judge assured both kids that they never had to see their mother again unless they chose to when they were adults, and that I would keep them safe. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes, but it felt monumental, officially ending the custody battle that had consumed our lives for months. Rebecca's defense lawyer reached out to Fiona about a plea deal the following week. He wanted to negotiate reduced charges in exchange for Rebecca pleading guilty and avoiding a trial. Fiona called me before responding to get my input on whether I'd support a plea agreement. I told her I wanted Rebecca to get the maximum possible sentence, and I didn't care if it took a trial to make that happen. Fiona agreed completely. She told Rebecca's lawyer that the only plea deal on the table was life in prison, without possibility of parole on all 3 murder counts, served consecutively. Anything less, and they'd go to trial. Fiona explained to me that the evidence was overwhelming between Hassan's detailed testimony, the forensic evidence from the crime scenes, and Logan's eyewitness account of Jennifer's murder. She was fully prepared to prosecute and confident of conviction on all counts. Rebecca's lawyer tried to argue that his client had mental health issues that should be considered in sentencing. Fiona shut that down by pointing out Rebecca's careful planning, her ability to maintain a normal facade, and her deliberate manipulation of everyone around her. Mental illness didn't excuse calculated murder. The plea negotiations went nowhere, and Fiona set a trial date for 6 months out. Logan's nightmares started about 3 weeks after his revelation. He'd wake up screaming several nights a week, sometimes multiple times in one night. I'd rush into his room to find him sitting up in bed, shaking and crying, unable to distinguish dreams from reality. The nightmares were always about the basement, about his mother finding him watching from the stairs, about the woman's body moving in the freezer. His therapist taught him grounding techniques to use when he woke up scared, helping him focus on what was real and present, rather than the memories. We created a detailed safety plan for nighttime that included a nightlight shaped like a turtle that projected stars on his ceiling, his therapy dog sleeping in a bed next to his, and me checking on him every hour throughout the night. I set alarms on my phone so I wouldn't miss the checks even when I was exhausted. Progress was incredibly slow, and there were nights when nothing seemed to help. But gradually, very gradually, Logan started sleeping slightly better. The nightmares didn't stop, but they became less frequent and less intense. Some nights he'd sleep for 4 or 5 hours straight, which felt like a miracle compared to the early weeks. Maya's therapy sessions revealed feelings she'd been hiding for months. She told her therapist she'd known something was wrong at Mommy's house, but couldn't figure out what it was. She'd noticed Logan becoming quieter and more scared after their visits. She'd seen the Nintendo games piling up and wondered why Mommy was suddenly being so nice. But she was only 9 years old and couldn't piece together what was really happening. Now she felt crushing guilt for not protecting Logan better, for not somehow figuring out he'd witnessed a murder and was threatened into silence. Her therapist worked patiently to help her understand that she was a child, and it wasn't her responsibility to figure out what adults were hiding. Maya couldn't have known what Logan had seen, or what Rebecca was threatening him with. The therapist emphasized that Maya had protected Logan in the most important way possible by speaking up in court when she knew something was wrong. That moment of bravery had started everything that led to Logan finally telling the truth. I reinforced this message constantly at home, telling Maya over and over that she'd done exactly the right thing and that I was proud of her courage. Slowly, session by session, the guilt started to ease, and Maya began focusing more on her own feelings and needs instead of just worrying about her brother. The prosecutor's office assigned us a victim services coordinator named Aisling McCallum to help navigate everything. She called me the day after the custody hearing to introduce herself and explain her role. Aisling would be our main point of contact with the prosecutor's office, helping us understand each step of the criminal case and accessing resources we needed. She walked me through the trial timeline, explained what would happen during different phases, and answered questions I didn't even know I had. She helped coordinate counseling services, connected us with a victims' compensation fund that could help pay for therapy, and provided information about our rights throughout the process. Having one consistent person who knew our case and could answer questions made the overwhelming legal system feel slightly more manageable. Aisling checked in with me every week, sometimes just to see how the kids were doing and if we needed anything. She became a lifeline during those early months when everything felt chaotic and impossible to navigate. I spent 3 weeks researching schools before I found Riverside Academy. The principal met with me personally and explained their trauma program. She walked me through classrooms where teachers used gentle voices and gave kids space when they needed it. I watched a teacher kneel down next to a quiet boy and wait patiently while he gathered his words. The school felt different from regular places. I enrolled both kids the following Monday. Logan's teacher was a soft-spoken woman who introduced herself and told him he could sit wherever felt comfortable. She didn't push him to talk or participate right away. Maya's teacher welcomed her warmly and showed her a corner with art supplies where kids could go when they needed a break. The first week was rough, with Logan refusing to get out of the car some mornings. But gradually, he started going in without fighting me. Maya made friends quickly and came home talking about a girl who also had a little brother who got scared sometimes. Fiona called me 4 weeks after Logan's revelation. She explained that Rebecca's trial was scheduled for 6 months from now. I felt my stomach drop at how far away that seemed. Fiona walked me through why the delay was necessary. The prosecution needed time to build their case properly, with 3 murder charges and all the forensic evidence. Hassan's testimony required preparation. The defense would file motions that needed responses. She assured me this timeline was completely normal for a case this serious. I asked if the kids would have to think about trial during those months. Fiona said they'd have time to focus on therapy and healing before any trial preparation started. That helped me feel slightly better about the wait. I wanted this over with immediately, but I also wanted the kids to have breathing room. 6 months felt like forever, and also not enough time. Logan sat in his therapist's office 5 weeks after everything happened. Scarlett had been working with him twice a week. This session started like the others, with Logan playing quietly with toys, while Scarlett talked gently. Then something shifted. Logan put down the toy car he'd been rolling back and forth. He looked at Scarlett and started talking about Tuesday night. His voice shook and tears ran down his face, but he kept going. He described the lady coming for dinner and the argument about money. He talked about hiding on the stairs and watching his mom push her. He explained how scared he felt when the lady stopped moving. He shared details he hadn't mentioned in his police interview about what Hassan said and how they wrapped the body. Scarlett listened without interrupting and handed him tissues when he needed them. The whole story took almost 20 minutes, with Logan crying through most of it. When he finished, Scarlett told him how brave he was. She explained that talking about scary things takes away some of their power. Logan nodded and wiped his eyes. He looked exhausted, but also somehow lighter than before. Detective Lockhart called me on a Tuesday afternoon 2 months after the arrests. His voice sounded tired when he told me they'd identified a possible 4th victim. A woman named Helena Hughes had gone missing 2 years ago. Police found items belonging to her in Rebecca's storage unit. They were investigating whether Rebecca killed her too, even though they hadn't recovered a body yet. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. The room spun slightly. 4 victims. Maybe 4 women dead because of Rebecca. I thought about my kids visiting that house and sleeping there while bodies were in the basement. I felt sick knowing there might be even more victims nobody knew about yet. Lockhart said they were checking missing persons reports going back 5 years. I thanked him for the update and hung up. Then I went to the bathroom and threw up. Maya came to me 3 days later with a request that surprised me. She wanted to write a letter to the lady Logan saw get hurt. She said she felt sorry that nobody helped her. I sat with Maya at the kitchen table and asked her therapist about it first. The therapist thought writing the letter was a healthy way for Maya to process her feelings, so Maya and I worked together on a letter to the victim's family. Maya wrote that she was sorry for what happened to their loved one. She said she wished someone had helped her. She explained that she and Logan were just kids, but they were sad about what their mom did. I helped her find the right words without making it too heavy. We mailed the letter to the family through the prosecutor's office. 2 weeks later, we got a response. The victim's sister wrote back thanking Maya for her kind words. She said the family didn't blame the children for anything. She told Maya that her aunt would have wanted Maya to be happy and safe. Maya cried when I read her the letter, but she seemed relieved. Rebecca's parents called me asking to see the kids. I stared at my phone for a long time after that conversation. They claimed they had no idea what their daughter had done. They sounded devastated and broken. But they were still Rebecca's parents. I didn't know if letting them have contact was good for Logan and Maya, or harmful. I called both therapists and explained the situation. We had long discussions about what would be best. The therapist suggested supervised phone calls once a month if the kids wanted them. No in-person visits yet, only calls with me present to monitor everything. I sat down with Logan and Maya and explained that their grandparents wanted to talk to them. Logan's face went white and he shook his head hard. He didn't want any contact right now. Maya thought about it and said she'd be willing to try a phone call. So we scheduled a call for Maya only. She talked to her grandparents for 15 minutes while I listened. They asked about school and her art. They didn't mention Rebecca or the trial. Maya seemed okay afterward. Logan still refused, and I didn't push him. Hassan's sentencing happened 3 months after his arrest. Fiona called to tell me he'd pleaded guilty to 3 counts of being an accessory after the fact and evidence tampering. He got 15 years in prison for helping Rebecca hide the bodies and cover up the murders. I felt angry that it seemed too light. He'd helped dispose of 3 women's bodies. He'd known what Rebecca did and stayed silent. 15 years didn't feel like enough punishment. But Fiona explained that Hassan's cooperation was critical for building the strongest case against Rebecca. His detailed testimony about what Rebecca did and said was evidence they couldn't get any other way. Without his cooperation, proving Rebecca's guilt would have been much harder. I understood the logic, but it still felt wrong. Fiona told me to focus on the fact that Hassan would be in prison and couldn't hurt anyone else. That helped slightly. At least he wasn't walking free. Rebecca's defense lawyers filed a bunch of motions trying to get evidence thrown out. They claimed Logan's testimony was obtained improperly. They argued Hassan's cooperation violated Rebecca's rights somehow. They challenged the search of Rebecca's house. Judge Perkins held a hearing to address all the motions. I sat in the courtroom while lawyers argued back and forth using legal terms I barely understood. Judge Perkins denied every single motion. He ruled that all evidence was properly obtained. He said Logan's testimony was given with appropriate protections for a child witness. He confirmed the search warrant was valid. Fiona told me afterward that these motions were expected. Defense lawyers always try to suppress evidence. The denials actually strengthened the prosecution's case because now there were official rulings saying everything was done correctly. Rebecca's lawyers had fewer options for appeal later. Logan started talking more around 3 months after the revelation. At home, he'd tell me about his day at the school instead of just shrugging. He participated in class discussions sometimes. He made a friend named Carlos who liked the same video games. There were still hard days when Logan shut down completely and wouldn't speak at all. But those days became less frequent. The progress felt real even though it was slow. His therapist told me he was doing better than she'd expected given how bad his trauma was. She said having a safe and stable home made a huge difference in his healing. Logan still flinched at loud noises and had nightmares some nights, but he was coming back to himself bit by bit. Maya's therapist recommended a support group for siblings of trauma survivors. The group met every other week at a community center. Kids Maya's age talked about what it was like having a brother or sister dealing with scary things. Maya was nervous before her first meeting. I drove her there and waited in the parking lot. When she came out an hour later, her face looked different. Lighter somehow. She told me it helped to meet other kids who understood what it was like to worry about your sibling all the time. She said one girl had a sister who'd been in a car accident, and another boy's brother had been really sick. They all got what it felt like to be scared and guilty and responsible. Maya went back 2 weeks later without me having to convince her. She started building friendships with kids who shared similar experiences. I felt grateful she was creating a support network beyond just me and her therapist. 4 months felt like years. The calendar pages turned while Logan worked through nightmares and Maya painted pictures of safer times. My parents called every Sunday to check on the kids and remind me they were proud of how I was handling everything. They took Logan and Maya for weekend visits sometimes, so I could breathe and handle all the legal paperwork piling up on my kitchen table. Fiona called 2 weeks before trial to walk me through what would happen in court. She explained jury selection and opening statements and how long the whole process might take. I asked if I needed to be there for all of it, and she said no, but she thought it would help if I attended at least the major parts. Aisling offered to sit with me during the trial so I wouldn't have to face it alone. I accepted immediately because the thought of sitting in that courtroom by myself made my chest tight. The morning of jury selection arrived cold and gray. I dropped Logan and Maya at my parents' house at 7 in the morning and drove to the courthouse with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Aisling met me in the parking lot with coffee and a calm smile that made me feel slightly less like I might throw up. We went through security and found seats in the gallery while lawyers questioned potential jurors about their ability to be fair and whether they could handle graphic evidence. Rebecca sat at the defense table in a gray suit, looking nothing like the screaming woman the bailiffs had dragged out of family court. She kept her face blank and neutral like her lawyers had probably coached her to do. The jury selection took all day, and by the end, 12 people and 4 alternates were sworn in to decide Rebecca's fate. Opening statements started the next morning. Fiona stood up and faced the jury with her shoulders back and her voice steady. She told them about 3 women who died because they confronted Rebecca about lies and money. She described how Rebecca pushed the first victim down basement stairs during an argument about debt. She explained how Rebecca strangled the second victim in her car after the woman threatened to expose Rebecca's financial fraud. She detailed how Rebecca poisoned the third victim with antifreeze mixed into coffee because the victim had discovered Rebecca was stealing from their workplace. Fiona's voice never wavered as she laid out the evidence of bodies stored in a basement freezer while Rebecca's children slept upstairs. She talked about Logan witnessing murder and being bribed into silence with video games and threats. She described Rebecca's manipulation of everyone around her, including the family court system. The jury sat perfectly still and listened to every word. Rebecca stared straight ahead without any expression on her face at all. The defense lawyer stood up next and tried to paint Rebecca as mentally ill and not responsible for her actions. He talked about her difficult childhood and past trauma and how she struggled with reality. He claimed the evidence would show Rebecca had severe disorders that made her unable to understand right from wrong. He said the real criminal was Hassan, who took advantage of Rebecca's mental state and manipulated her into helping hide bodies he had killed. The jury looked skeptical, but they were supposed to keep open minds until all the evidence came out. I sat next to Aisling and felt sick listening to the defense try to excuse what Rebecca did to those women, and to Logan. The prosecution's case started that afternoon with forensic evidence. A medical examiner took the stand and described in clinical detail how the first victim died from head trauma consistent with falling downstairs. She showed autopsy photos that made 2 jurors look away. She explained how the body had been wrapped in plastic and stored in a freezer within hours of death. Another medical examiner testified about the second victim who died from strangulation and showed pictures of bruising patterns on the neck. The third victim's cause of death was antifreeze poisoning, confirmed by toxicology reports showing high levels of ethylene glycol in tissue samples. Each examiner was calm and professional, but the details were horrible to hear. I kept thinking about Logan watching the first murder happen and having to keep that secret locked inside him for days. A forensic specialist explained the timeline of the murders based on decomposition rates and evidence from the crime scene. The first victim died on the Tuesday night Logan witnessed, just like he said. The second victim had been dead approximately 18 months based on tissue analysis. The third victim had been dead almost 3 years. The specialist described how the bodies were preserved in a commercial-grade freezer in Rebecca's basement, and how the freezer had been running continuously based on electric company records. She showed photos of the basement and the freezer, and the plastic wrapping around each body. The images appeared on screens around the courtroom, and I had to look at my hands because seeing where Logan had lived with those bodies made me want to scream. More specialists testified about evidence collection and chain of custody and DNA matches. A forensic accountant explained Rebecca's financial fraud and how all 3 victims had confronted her about money she owed or stole. The accountant showed bank records and forged documents and a pattern of Rebecca stealing from employers and friends and family members over years. Every piece of evidence built on the last one until the picture of Rebecca as a calculating killer became impossible to deny. I sat through 6 hours of testimony that first day and left the courthouse feeling drained and angry. Aisling drove me to pick up the kids because I didn't trust myself behind the wheel. Hassan took the stand on day 3 of the trial. He looked smaller than I remembered, and his hands shook when he was sworn in. Fiona asked him to describe his relationship with Rebecca, and he said they'd been dating for 2 years. She asked him about Tuesday night, and he started crying before he even began talking. He described getting a call from Rebecca around 9 at night, saying she needed help with something urgent. He drove to her house and found her in the basement, standing over the woman's body at the bottom of the stairs. Rebecca told him the woman had attacked her and fallen during the struggle. Hassan said he believed her at first because Rebecca was good at lying, and he loved her. He helped wrap the body in plastic from the garage and move it into the freezer. Rebecca told him Logan was asleep upstairs and didn't know anything about what happened. Fiona asked Hassan about the other bodies, and he broke down completely. He said he didn't know about the other 2 victims until after he helped with the first one. Rebecca showed him the freezer contents a week later and told him if he ever said anything to anyone, she would tell police he killed all 3 women. She had kept evidence that would frame him, including his fingerprints on the plastic and his DNA under the first victim's fingernails that she'd planted there. Hassan was trapped and terrified, so he stayed quiet and helped Rebecca maintain her normal life. He described how Rebecca talked about the bodies like trophies and how she seemed proud of getting away with murder for so long. She told him the second victim had threatened to expose her fraud, so she'd lured the woman to her car and strangled her. The third victim had figured out Rebecca was stealing from their workplace, so Rebecca invited her for coffee and poisoned her. Rebecca talked about killing people who crossed her like it was just solving problems. The defense lawyer cross-examined Hassan hard, trying to make him look like the real killer. He pointed out Hassan's plea deal and suggested Hassan was lying to save himself. He asked why Hassan didn't go to police if he was really innocent, and Hassan said he was scared Rebecca would frame him like she threatened. The lawyer showed Hassan's criminal record, including a prior assault charge from 10 years ago. He tried to paint Hassan as violent and manipulative, but Hassan kept insisting Rebecca was the one who killed all 3 women. The jury looked disturbed by the whole testimony. Several jurors were crying when Hassan described how Rebecca kept the bodies in the freezer and talked about them casually. I had to leave the courtroom twice during Hassan's testimony because hearing the details of what Logan had been living with made me physically ill. Hassan testified for 2 full days, total answering every question from both sides. By the end, his credibility seemed solid despite the defense's attempts to destroy it. Too many details matched the physical evidence in Logan's account. The prosecution rested after Hassan's testimony and several smaller witnesses who confirmed various facts. Judge Perkins called a recess before the defense case would begin. I went home that night and held Logan and Maya close and thanked them again for being brave enough to tell the truth. Logan asked if the trial was almost over, and I told him it would probably take another week or two. He nodded and went back to playing with our dog like the weight of the world wasn't on his small shoulders. The defense case started with psychiatric experts who testified about Rebecca's supposed mental illnesses. A psychiatrist described Rebecca as having severe personality disorders and possible schizophrenia that made her unable to understand reality. He claimed Rebecca's childhood trauma had damaged her ability to process right and wrong. He suggested Rebecca genuinely believed her victims were threatening her life, and she acted in self-defense each time. Another expert talked about Rebecca's dissociative episodes and how she might not even remember committing the murders. The testimony sounded professional and scientific, but it felt like a desperate attempt to excuse the inexcusable. Fiona cross-examined each expert carefully. She asked about Rebecca's ability to hold jobs and maintain relationships and manipulate the family court system. She pointed out that someone with severe schizophrenia couldn't successfully hide 3 bodies for years while appearing completely normal to everyone around her. She showed evidence of Rebecca's careful planning, including buying plastic wrap and cleaning supplies before the first murder. She highlighted Rebecca's threats to Logan and her fabrication of evidence against me, proving she understood consequences and cause and effect. She demonstrated that Rebecca's public behavior was calculated and controlled, showing she could distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable actions. Each expert had to admit Rebecca showed signs of understanding her actions were wrong based on her efforts to hide evidence and threaten witnesses into silence. The insanity defense started falling apart under Fiona's questioning. The jury looked unconvinced by the psychiatric testimony, and several jurors were taking detailed notes during the cross-examination. The defense rested after 3 days of witnesses. Judge Perkins announced that Logan's video-recorded interview would be played for the jury the next morning. Aisling warned me it would be difficult to watch and offered to sit with me outside the courtroom if I needed to leave. I told her I'd try to stay, but I wasn't sure I could handle hearing Logan's small voice describe what he witnessed without breaking down. That night, I barely slept thinking about my 7-year-old son's testimony being played in front of strangers while Rebecca sat there listening. The courtroom was packed the next morning with more people in the gallery than any previous day. News of Logan's testimony had spread, and reporters filled the back rows. Judge Perkins warned everyone that any outbursts would result in removal from the courtroom. The lights dimmed slightly, and a large screen was set up facing the jury. Logan's face appeared on the screen sitting in the comfortable interview room at the Child Advocacy Center. He looked so small in the video, holding a stuffed animal the interviewer had given him. His voice was quiet when he started talking about Tuesday night. I lasted maybe 5 minutes before I had to leave. Aisling followed me out into the hallway, and we sat on a bench while Logan's voice continued from inside the courtroom, describing his mother pushing a woman down the stairs. I put my head in my hands and cried while Aisling rubbed my back and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. My son had witnessed murder and been threatened into silence, and now his testimony was played for a room full of strangers. I felt like I'd failed to protect him, even though logically I knew I couldn't have prevented what happened. After 20 minutes, Aisling went back inside to see how much longer the video would run. She came back out and told me it was almost over, and several jurors were crying. When the video finished, we went back into the courtroom. The jury looked shaken and angry. Rebecca still showed no emotion at all sitting at the defense table. Fiona told the judge she had no further questions about the video evidence. The defense lawyer stood up and argued the video should be given limited weight because Logan was a traumatized child, but Judge Perkins overruled him, saying the video spoke for itself. Rebecca took the stand in her own defense that afternoon against her lawyer's advice. She wore a soft blue sweater instead of her usual suit, probably trying to look sympathetic. She testified that Hassan had committed all 3 murders and forced her to help hide the bodies by threatening to hurt her children. She claimed Hassan was violent and controlling, and she was too scared to go to police. She said Hassan had planted evidence to frame her and manipulated Logan into believing she was the killer. She insisted she loved her children and would never hurt anyone. Her testimony directly contradicted every piece of evidence and Hassan's detailed account. She cried on the stand, talking about how much she missed Logan and Maya and how she just wanted them to know she was innocent. Fiona's cross-examination was brutal. She asked Rebecca about the threats she'd made to me, and Rebecca claimed I was lying. Fiona showed the text messages and screenshots proving Rebecca had threatened me with false evidence. She asked about the Nintendo Switch games, and Rebecca said those were just gifts, not bribes. Fiona showed receipts proving Rebecca bought 1 game for each day after the murder, exactly like Logan said. She asked about Rebecca's violent outburst in family court, and Rebecca claimed she was just upset about false accusations. Fiona played the video of Rebecca lunging at Logan and screaming she would kill him. She asked how an innocent mother would threaten her own child, and Rebecca had no good answer. Fiona walked Rebecca through each murder, showing how Rebecca's own actions proved premeditation and planning. She highlighted Rebecca's manipulation of the therapy system and the family court and everyone around her. By the end of cross-examination, Rebecca was sweating and contradicting herself, and the jury looked disgusted. Her credibility was completely destroyed. The trial moved to closing arguments after Rebecca stepped down. The defense lawyer gave a desperate speech about reasonable doubt and mental illness, and how the jury couldn't be certain Rebecca was guilty beyond reasonable doubt. He tried one last time to blame Hassan and claim Rebecca was a victim. The jury looked bored and unconvinced. Fiona stood up for the prosecution's closing, and her voice was strong and clear. She reminded the jury of 3 women who died because they confronted Rebecca about her lies. She talked about a 7-year-old boy who witnessed murder and was threatened into silence. She walked through the overwhelming evidence piece by piece, showing Rebecca's guilt was certain. She asked the jury to give justice to the victims and protect the community from a dangerous killer. The courtroom was silent when Fiona sat down. Judge Perkins gave the jury their instructions and sent them to deliberate. Aisling and I waited in the hallway because I couldn't sit in the courtroom anymore. Other victim family members waited with us, and we made awkward small talk about nothing important. 6 hours later, the bailiff came out and announced the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom, and my heart was pounding, so hard I could hear it in my ears. The jury foreman stood up when Judge Perkins asked if they'd reached a verdict. Guilty on count 1 first-degree murder. Guilty on count 2 first-degree murder. Guilty on count 3 first-degree murder. Guilty on evidence tampering. Guilty on threatening a witness. Guilty on child endangerment. The courtroom stayed silent as all the verdicts were read. Rebecca sat completely still without any expression at all, like she was a statue. I felt something loosen in my chest, knowing she'd been held accountable, but it didn't undo any of the trauma she'd caused. The victim families were crying and holding each other. Judge Perkins scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later and dismissed the jury with thanks for their service. Sentencing day arrived gray and cold. The courtroom was full again with victim families ready to give impact statements. The first victim's sister spoke about a kind woman who loved animals and volunteered at shelters and died because she asked for money she was owed. The second victim's mother described a daughter who worked hard and cared for her elderly parents and was murdered for threatening to expose fraud. The third victim's husband talked about his wife who loved gardening and their grandchildren and was poisoned because she discovered theft at work. Each statement was painful to hear and showed the real human cost of Rebecca's actions. Several family members spoke directly to Rebecca, asking why she took their loved ones, but Rebecca stared straight ahead without responding. Judge Perkins called me forward to give my impact statement. I walked to the podium on shaking legs and looked at the judge instead of at Rebecca. I described Logan's nightmares and how he woke up screaming about basements and freezers. I talked about Maya's guilt and fear, and how she felt responsible for not protecting her brother. I explained the therapy and medication and long road to healing they both still faced. I said my children would carry this trauma for the rest of their lives because their mother chose to murder people and use them as tools to hide her crimes. My voice broke when I talked about Logan being threatened into silence with video games and promises that I would go to jail if he told the truth. I said Rebecca had stolen my children's sense of safety and trust, and no prison sentence could give that back. Judge Perkins thanked me, and I returned to my seat next to Aisling. Rebecca's lawyer asked for mercy and concurrent sentences, claiming Rebecca had mental health issues that deserved treatment, not punishment. Judge Perkins listened without expression. When the lawyer finished, Judge Perkins looked directly at Rebecca and said the evidence showed clear premeditation and a pattern of violence spanning years. He said Rebecca had manipulated everyone, including her own children, and showed no remorse for her actions. He sentenced Rebecca to life in prison without possibility of parole on each murder count to be served consecutively. 3 life sentences meant Rebecca would never be free again. She would die in prison. The courtroom stayed quiet as the sentence was read. Rebecca finally showed emotion and started crying, but it felt fake like everything else about her. The bailiffs led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I never wanted to see her face again. I met Aisling at her office the day after sentencing with Logan and Maya. We sat in her comfortable meeting room with the kids on either side of me on the couch. Aisling explained in simple words that their mother had been found guilty and would be in prison forever. Logan asked if that meant he was safe now. I pulled him close and promised yes, absolutely safe, that Rebecca could never hurt him or anyone else again. Maya asked if they did the right thing by telling the truth. I looked at both of them and said they absolutely did the right thing. I told them they helped stop someone dangerous and saved other people from getting hurt. I said telling the truth was the bravest thing anyone could do, especially when it was scary. Logan leaned against me and Maya held my hand, and we sat together in Aisling's office knowing the worst was finally over. The healing would take time, but we had time now. We had safety and truth in each other, and that was enough to start building our future. Logan's therapist started our next session by sitting across from him with a calm expression and asking how he felt about the trial being over. Logan picked at the edge of the couch cushion and said he didn't know, that it felt weird knowing his mom would be in prison forever. The therapist nodded and explained that what happened wasn't Logan's fault, that his mom made choices that hurt people, and he was incredibly brave for telling the truth. Logan looked up and asked if telling the truth was really the right thing when it made everyone so upset. The therapist leaned forward and said, absolutely yes, that telling the truth protected other people from getting hurt and helped families find answers about their loved ones. Logan's eyes filled with tears, and he said he still felt scared sometimes that his mom would somehow get out and come find him. The therapist reassured him that his mom was locked up in a place where she couldn't hurt anyone ever again, and that he was safe with me now. Maya's therapist worked with her in a separate room, helping her understand that she didn't have to be Logan's protector anymore. Maya said it was hard to stop worrying about him all the time, that she felt like if she wasn't watching him, something bad would happen. Her therapist explained that being a big sister was important, but Maya also needed to focus on her own feelings and needs, that it was okay to just be a kid sometimes. Maya asked if that meant she was supposed to stop caring about Logan. The therapist smiled and said no, it meant she could care about him without feeling like his survival depended on her every single moment. Maya nodded slowly and said she'd try, but it felt strange not to be constantly checking on him. 6 months passed with both kids going to therapy twice a week and taking their medications regularly. Logan started talking more at the school and made friends with a boy in his class who liked the same video games. I watched him laugh at something his friend said during a playdate and felt my chest tighten with relief that he could still experience joy after everything. His nightmares decreased from every night to maybe twice a week, and when he woke up scared, I could usually calm him down within a few minutes. His teacher called me to say Logan was participating in class discussions now and seemed more comfortable around other kids. His therapist told me during a parent meeting that Logan showed remarkable strength and that having a stable home environment was crucial to his healing. She said some kids never recovered from trauma this severe, but Logan was doing the work and making real progress. Maya joined an art program at the community center where she painted and made sculptures out of clay. Her art teacher said Maya had a natural talent and used her art to express complex emotions in healthy ways. I went to Maya's first art show and saw a painting she'd made of a house with bright windows and flowers in the yard, and she told me it represented our apartment and how safe she felt there now. Her guilt about not protecting Logan better had lessened with therapy, though she still had moments where she blamed herself for not knowing what was happening at their mom's house. Her therapist said Maya was learning to focus on her own interests and needs instead of constantly monitoring Logan, which was a huge step forward. Maya still checked on Logan sometimes, but it wasn't the desperate vigilance it used to be, more like normal sibling care. I spent weekends painting the kids' bedrooms in colors they chose and helping them decorate with posters and shelves for their stuff. Logan picked blue walls and put up posters of his favorite video game characters, and Maya chose purple with space for displaying her artwork. We established routines that made everyone feel secure, like Friday movie nights where we ordered pizza and watched whatever film the kids picked. Sunday mornings meant pancakes that I made while the kids set the table and picked toppings from the collection of syrups and fruits I kept stocked. These normal family moments felt like the best medicine for all of us, creating positive memories to replace the traumatic ones. And then I bought a bigger couch so we could all sit together comfortably and set up a craft corner where Maya could work on art projects. Logan's room had a reading nook with pillows where he liked to spend quiet time with books from the library. The apartment transformed from a temporary shelter into a real home where both kids felt they belonged. Detective Lockhart called me one afternoon while the kids were at the school and said the investigation into the potential fourth victim had concluded. He explained they found evidence in Rebecca's storage unit that linked her to a woman who disappeared 2 years ago, including the woman's jewelry and personal items. The victim's family finally had answers about what happened to their daughter, even though there was no body and no additional trial since Rebecca was already serving multiple life sentences. Lockhart thanked me again for supporting Logan through his testimony and said Logan's courage led to justice for multiple families who'd been searching for answers for years. He said the case was officially closed and Rebecca would never hurt anyone else again. I thanked him for handling everything with such care for Logan's well-being and hung up feeling a weight lift knowing the investigation was complete. The kids and I started volunteering at a local organization that supported families affected by violent crime. We attended monthly meetings where families shared their experiences and supported each other through the aftermath of trauma. Maya enjoyed talking with other kids who were dealing with scary situations, and I watched her confidence grow as she realized she could help others by sharing what she'd learned. Logan liked knowing his experience could help other people understand what kids go through when they witness violence. The organization coordinator asked if we'd be willing to share our story in age-appropriate ways to help train counselors who work with traumatized children, and after talking with both therapists, we agreed. Maya spoke at a training session about how therapy helped her process her feelings, and Logan drew pictures that showed counselors how kids might express trauma through art when they can't use words. The volunteer work gave their experience meaning beyond just the trauma, transforming something horrible into a way to help others. 1 year after the courtroom revelation, we had a small celebration at home with cake and decorations. Logan was sleeping through most nights now without nightmares, doing well in the school with good grades and friends, and talking openly about his feelings with his therapist and with me. Maya was confident and happy, pursuing her art without the constant weight of worry about her brother. I managed my own trauma better through continued therapy and felt genuinely hopeful about our future for the first time in years. We looked at photos from the past year showing the kids smiling and playing, such a contrast to the scared, silent children they'd been right after the trial. Logan blew out his candles and wished for our family to stay happy and safe, and Maya added that she wished for a dog. I laughed and said we'd talk about the dog idea, not making any promises yet. The celebration felt like acknowledging how far we'd come, while recognizing we still had healing work ahead of us. Logan's therapist recommended during our next parent meeting that we start reducing his sessions from twice weekly to once weekly. She explained he'd made such strong progress developing healthy coping skills and building a strong support system that intensive therapy wasn't necessary anymore. Logan would always carry the trauma in his background, but he'd learned how to manage it and process difficult feelings in healthy ways. The transition to less frequent therapy felt like a positive milestone rather than something scary. We scheduled his sessions for every Monday after school, and he seemed relieved to have more free time for activities with friends. His therapist said we'd eventually move to monthly check-ins once he maintained his progress for several more months. Maya asked one Saturday morning if we could get a dog, because her friend at the school had one, and it seemed really nice. I consulted with both kids' therapists who thought having a pet would be great for them, providing comfort and teaching responsibility. We visited the animal shelter the following weekend and walked through rows of kennels looking at different dogs. A gentle golden retriever mix approached the front of her kennel and pressed her nose against the gate when Logan reached his hand toward her. The shelter worker said the dog's name was Honey, and she was 3 years old, very calm and good with children. We spent time in the meeting room with Honey, and she sat quietly between both kids, letting them pet her soft fur. Logan buried his face in her neck and said she felt warm and safe. Maya asked if we could take her home, and I agreed after filling out the adoption paperwork. Honey settled into our apartment immediately, sleeping in Logan's room at night and following the kids around during the day. Having a pet to care for gave them both a sense of purpose and responsibility, and Honey provided comfort during difficult moments when the trauma resurfaced. Our family felt complete in a way it hadn't since before the divorce, with the dog adding a layer of warmth and normalcy to our home. An envelope arrived in the mail one afternoon, addressed to Logan in careful handwriting. I opened it and found a letter from the sister of the first victim, thanking Logan for his bravery. The letter said their mother could finally rest in peace, knowing justice had been served, and the person responsible would never hurt anyone else. The sister wrote that Logan's courage to tell the truth, even when he was scared, had given their whole family closure after years of not knowing what happened. She thanked him for being so strong and said she hoped he knew how many lives he'd helped by speaking up. I read the letter to Logan that evening after dinner, and he cried quietly while I held him. He said he was glad he told the truth even though it was really scary, and he'd been afraid his mom would hurt him or me. I told him he was one of the bravest people I'd ever known, and that what he did mattered in ways he might not fully understand yet. Logan asked if the lady's family was okay now, and I explained that they'd never stop missing her, but at least they had answers, and knew justice was served. Logan wiped his eyes and said he hoped telling the truth helped them feel a little bit better. He was beginning to understand that his courage had made a real difference in the world, beyond just our family. The school reports arrived in the mail on a Wednesday afternoon, thick envelopes from both Logan's second-grade teacher and Maya's fourth-grade teacher. I opened Logan's first and read through 3 pages of detailed observations about how he'd become a leader in his class, helping shy kids feel included during recess and group projects. His teacher wrote that other students looked up to him and felt safe around him, that he showed unusual empathy for a 7-year-old. Maya's report was similar, describing how she'd volunteered for the peer support program and spent her lunch periods mentoring younger students who were struggling. Both teachers mentioned their resilience and kindness, noting how the kids transformed their own difficult experiences into genuine care for others. I called both kids into the living room and read the reports out loud, watching their faces light up with pride. Logan asked if he could bring his report to therapy to show his therapist, and Maya wanted to hang hers on the refrigerator next to her artwork. Honey the dog wagged her tail and pushed her nose against Logan's hand, sensing his happiness. We celebrated with ice cream after dinner, and I felt overwhelming gratitude that they were not just surviving their trauma, but actually growing stronger because of how they'd faced it. Rebecca's parents called my phone on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later, asking tentatively if they could see their grandchildren. I hadn't spoken to them since the trial, when they'd sat in the courtroom looking devastated by what their daughter had done. They explained they understood if I said no, but they missed Logan and Maya terribly and wanted to be part of their lives if possible. I told them I needed to discuss it with the kids and their therapists before making any decisions. Logan's therapist thought supervised visits could be healthy if the grandparents respected boundaries and never defended Rebecca's actions. Maya's therapist agreed, noting that having extended family who loved them could support their continued healing. I sat down with both kids that evening and explained that their grandparents wanted to see them. Maya said she missed them and wanted to visit, but Logan was quieter, asking if they would try to make him talk about his mom. I promised him no one would force him to discuss anything he didn't want to, and that I would be present the entire time. We agreed to try one visit at a neutral location, a park near our apartment where the kids felt comfortable. The first meeting was awkward but gentle, with Rebecca's parents bringing a soccer ball for Logan and art supplies for Maya. They never mentioned Rebecca except to say they were sorry for what happened, and they loved the kids no matter what. Logan relaxed after 20 minutes and kicked the soccer ball around with his grandfather, while Maya showed her grandmother the drawings she'd been working on. We scheduled monthly visits going forward, and the relationship slowly rebuilt on a foundation of respect and clear boundaries. My supervisor called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon and offered me a promotion to senior analyst with a significant salary increase. The position would require slightly longer hours some weeks, but came with better benefits and more flexibility for family emergencies. I thought about the kids and their therapy costs, the activities they wanted to try, the summer camps that could support their continued growth. I accepted the promotion knowing we were in a stable place and the kids could handle the small adjustment to our routine. The extra income meant I could afford their therapy sessions as long as they needed them without worrying about insurance limits or co-pays. I could sign Logan up for the soccer league he'd been asking about and enroll Maya in the advanced art program at the community center. When I told the kids about the new job that evening, Maya asked if this meant we could finally get the bigger apartment we'd been looking at, and I said yes, we could start apartment hunting next month. Logan wanted to know if I'd still be home for dinner most nights, and I promised him absolutely yes, that family time was still my top priority. The promotion felt like another step forward, proof that we were building a real life together instead of just surviving day to day. Logan sat in his therapist's office during his weekly session and talked about the basement without his hands shaking or his voice going quiet. He told her he didn't think about it as much anymore, maybe once every few days instead of constantly. When the memories did come back, he could use his breathing exercises and grounding techniques to manage the anxiety without it taking over completely. His therapist asked about his nightmares, and Logan said he only had them occasionally now, maybe once or twice a week instead of every single night. He was sleeping peacefully most nights, sometimes even through until morning without waking up scared. She made notes in her file and told him this represented huge progress from the terrified, silent child he'd been a year ago. Logan asked if he was getting better, and she assured him yes, he was healing in remarkable ways. She explained that he'd always carry the trauma in his background, but he'd learned how to live with it instead of being controlled by it. They scheduled his next appointment for 2 weeks out instead of 1 week, another milestone in his recovery. When I picked him up after the session, Logan seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted from his shoulders. He told me in the car that he felt proud of himself for being brave and doing the hard work of healing. 18 months after the courtroom revelation, I looked around our new apartment and saw a completely different family than the scared, broken people we'd been. Logan was confident and talkative, coming home from the school with stories about his soccer games and science club projects. He had friends who came over for playdates, and he laughed easily without that haunted look in his eyes. Maya was creating beautiful art pieces that covered our walls, painting and drawing with a freedom she'd never had when she was constantly worried about her brother. She'd joined the school drama club and was rehearsing for their spring musical, singing songs around the apartment while she did homework. Our home was filled with normal sibling arguments about whose turn it was to pick the movie and who got the last cookie. Honey the dog sprawled across the living room floor while the kids played board games on weekends. We had routines and traditions that made us feel like a real family, not just people surviving trauma together. Logan still had occasional hard days where the memories resurfaced, and Maya sometimes reverted to her protective role when she sensed her brother struggling. But mostly they were just kids being kids, pursuing their interests and building their futures without the weight of fear holding them back. I watched them together and felt amazed by their resilience, their ability to transform something horrible into strength and empathy. We packed the car early on a Saturday morning in June and drove 4 hours to the beach for our first real vacation together. The kids had never been to the ocean, and they pressed their faces against the windows as we got closer, trying to catch the first glimpse of water. We checked into a small beach house I'd rented for the week, and Logan and Maya immediately changed into swimsuits and ran down to the sand. I followed them with towels and sunscreen, watching as they discovered the waves and the endless stretch of beach. Logan built elaborate sandcastles with moats and towers, completely absorbed in the project without any trace of anxiety or fear. Maya collected shells in a plastic bucket, examining each one carefully before deciding if it was special enough to keep. They played in the shallow waves, shrieking with laughter when the water splashed them, chasing each other along the shoreline like any other kids on summer vacation. I sat on a beach towel and watched them, feeling overwhelming gratitude that we'd made it through the darkness to this place of healing and hope. They weren't defined by what Rebecca had done to them or what Logan had witnessed. They were defined by their courage in telling the truth, their resilience in facing their trauma, their determination to build happy lives despite everything. The beach week was filled with ice cream cones and mini golf, sunrise walks and evening bonfires, simple moments that felt precious because we'd fought so hard to get here. On our last night, Logan asked if we could come back next summer, and I promised him yes. Absolutely yes. Logan sat across from his therapist during what would be his final major therapy milestone session. She asked him to talk about his mother, and he spoke calmly about what happened without the fear or anxiety that used to overwhelm him. He explained that Rebecca was his mom, and she did terrible things, and both those facts could be true at the same time. He said he felt sad sometimes that he didn't have a normal mom, but he didn't feel scared anymore. The trauma was part of his past, something that happened to him, but didn't control who he was now or who he would become in the future. His therapist smiled and told him he'd developed incredibly strong emotional regulation skills and healthy coping mechanisms that would serve him throughout his life. She said he'd done all the hard work of processing his trauma and learning to live with it in healthy ways. They would continue occasional check-ins, maybe once a month or every few months, just to make sure he maintained his progress. But intensive weekly therapy wasn't necessary anymore because he'd built the tools he needed to handle difficult feelings when they came up. Logan asked if this meant he was fixed, and she gently explained that healing wasn't about being fixed or going back to how things were before. It was about learning to carry what happened and still live a full, happy life. He'd done that work, and she was proud of him. When the session ended, Logan gave his therapist a hug and thanked her for helping him feel safe enough to talk about scary things. Our family had built a completely new life together based on safety, honesty, and unconditional love. The kids knew they could always talk to me about anything without fear of judgment or punishment, that telling the truth was always the right choice no matter how scary it felt. We'd learned that lesson together in the hardest possible way, and it became the foundation everything else was built on. We honored the memory of Rebecca's victims by living fully and helping others, volunteering with organizations that supported families affected by violence and trauma. Logan and Maya understood that their courage in speaking up had saved other people from getting hurt, that their trauma had meaning beyond just their own pain. They were happy, healthy kids with bright futures ahead of them, pursuing their interests and building friendships and dreaming about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Logan talked about becoming a therapist someday to help other kids who went through scary things. Maya wanted to use her art to raise money for victims' families. They'd transformed their worst experience into purpose and compassion. I was proud of them every single day, not just for surviving something no child should ever have to face, but for choosing to become kind, empathetic people, despite what they'd been through. We had family dinners where everyone shared their best and worst parts of the day. We had movie nights and game nights and lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes. We had a dog who loved us and a home that felt safe. We had each other, and that was enough. The trauma would always be part of our story, but it wasn't the whole story anymore. We were writing new chapters filled with hope and healing, proving every day that courage and love could overcome even the darkest things.